Welcome to this event, which is part of our expanded design lecture series organized by Professors Gail Swanland and Erkki Huhtamo. And this is our fourth session and the second last. And tonight we are going to have a look at one of the really quickly expanding fields of design, which is game design. Of course, as you all know, this has also become a very big industry, but it's also a new form of creativity, which has its own design challenges, complicated issues, as you will be hearing quite soon. And I'm especially happy to have as our guest tonight one of the, shall I say, one of the most distinguished game developers, game designers, producers in this country, Louis Castle. And Louis Castle is the co-founder of an important game company named Westwood Studios. And so he's basically, with his partner, built that whole company from the ground up. And this Westwood Studios is a premier development studio for the electronic arts. And it's responsible for many really well-known, so should I say, cult game titles. It's a very important ones like Command and Conquer, Blade Runner, Lands of Lore, Pirates of Skull Cave, Monopoly, and The Lion King. And so tonight Louis Castle will talk us about the game design process, as you will see on the screen. And he has also promised to show you some examples about games that actually nobody has been able to see so far because they are not absolutely finished. So help me welcome Mr. Louis Castle.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be walking back and forth here, clicking away madly. So the first thing I always start with if I give a talk is a little bit of a biography, so you know what my background is. I've been introduced fairly extensively now, so maybe you know most of it. But my professional experience actually ranges a lot of disciplines. Prior to, and actually while starting Westwood Studios, I was a fine arts and computer science dual baccalaureate at the University of Las Vegas. I was working at a computer store, consulting, and started my company. So I was pretty busy. During the first few years, actually before we started Westwood was in '85, so back in 1981 all the way to '93, I was an active computer graphic artist. I ended my career as an artist just about the time that 3D software packages started becoming very popular. As a programmer, I started a little later, learned programming a bit later in my career, a few years later, and ended a little bit later as a programmer as well. One of the last things I did was write a complete 3D software package for Disney, which didn't get published, but it gave me a fundamental understanding of 3D physics as well as texturing and a lot of other things. This is not going to be a really technical talk, so if you're into liberal arts, visuals, that's really what I'm focused on. I'm a founder of Westwood Studios. Myself and Brett started the company in our garage, in my garage, in 1985. It was just the two of us. We never got any money from anybody. We grew the company to 29 people in 1992. 7 years later, we were purchased by Virgin. We became part of Virgin. Virgin was acquired by many companies. And in 1998, at the size of about 170 people, we were then acquired by Electronic Arts. So in all that time, I've been a director of design, which is called an executive producer in our business, and I still do that. And specifically from the time we were purchased by Virgin until just 2 years ago, I was the operating officer and financial officer for the company. So as an entrepreneur, I grew the company from 2 to 250 people. And as a general manager, I've been managing it since 2000. My partner has taken a very design-heavy role and actually has recently gone on sabbatical. So don't know if he'll be back. He's pretty tired. But I seem to have endless energy, so I will keep going. Well, I'm going to actually move off the slides here, and I'm going to go to one of our recent products. It's just now shipping. It's called Command & Conquer Renegade. If you guys are playing games, you might actually know about it. It was we put a demo up on GameSpy, and it was the most downloaded demo in history for GameSpy. We had, I guess they're happy if they see 40 to 50,000 downloads in a month. We had 140,000 in 8 hours, and we kind of buried their servers. So if you like to play games on GameSpy Arcade, sorry. We kind of destroyed that for a couple of hours last weekend. And since then, actually, it's continued to, we fixed some of the problems, and GameSpy have gotten more servers up, and it's been really, really popular. It's been growing in popularity. Well over 200,000 people have downloaded the demo. The product is shipping around the world this week. So what I'm showing you is a product that really will be out in just a couple of days. So that's not so new. The focus of my talk will be on design. It's a talk that's really about a 5-hour presentation. It was a seminar that was done for Electronic Arts internally. I've taken just the front part of that, which is pre-production, and that's what I'm going to focus on. The talk is still structured as a 10-bullet item talk, but we're only going to focus on 1 and 2 because the rest of them are more about getting it done, and this whole focus here is about what is it that you're going to do. So to start off, I'm going to actually play through the first level here. Now, I have one disclaimer. This laptop is not new because I don't want to move all my software onto a new laptop. So this is running an old ATI Rage Pro card. If any of you guys are really technical, this is like below our minimum spec for this game. So my apologies for the bumps and stutters, and it doesn't have all the cool shading techniques and the grass and all that other stuff, but you'll get the idea. So let me go and show the game here. Okay, it's going to take just a minute for it to load up, and this is a war game, so it's going to be loud, lots of explosions, good stuff like that. But it should give you an idea of the kind of spaces and the kind of things that we build. And afterward, I think it'll give you a lot of context for the discussion. So I'll let it run here, and try not to blab too much over the top. Can we turn that up a bit?
Recon 1, this is Eagle Base.
Oh no, I think it's okay. Can you guys hear it all?
Copy, Eagle Base.
Okay.
Still no sign of any non-installation.
So the whole point of this game is you are a superhero commando. So these guys are in a tight spot, and they send in you as a reinforcement.
Clear!
Okay, so in this game you can run around, look around the world, and I'll try not to run too quickly here, but I do have to move. So you can actually play the game in first person, which is sort of the camera is your eyes, or you can play it in third person where you see your character from behind. And that was a pretty big design decision right there.
Let's give you a surprise.
Hey, it's happened. Captain Havoc, this way. Are we glad to see you? Do not want to see
So I know the audio isn't up very loud, but there's an actual sound score that's going on in the background here as well. Lots of different elements to this product. Now, again, I'm actually playing it, so depending on where I'm looking, I might see some action happening. If I look the wrong way, of course, something has to be going on. Another key element that's different with interactive design from film and video is that you don't have control over the camera in an interactive production. So you need to have enough things going on so that no matter where the player is looking, there's something interesting happening. If you want them to look in a particular place, it's very disruptive to take control of the camera.
We pushed them back! Look, they're on the run! We did it! Thanks, Havoc. We owe you big time.
And in this game, part of it is not just running around on foot with your machine guns and stuff, it's actually driving vehicles. So this is not really so much of a, this is more of a technology issue, but it does come into a lot of design because when you go to design the product, you have to assume that somebody might be in a vehicle or they might be on foot.
Tank is repaired and ready to roll.
So in this case, I'm going to hop in the tank.
Reinforcements have arrived.
This is a teen-rated game, too, I might add. We did The Lion King and Monopoly, and we've done a lot of family-oriented entertainment. This would not be one of those products. This is actually aimed at an older audience. And we're pretty sensitive about that subject, actually. We want people to be able to make any kind of product they want. We've never made anything for mature or adults, certainly. But I think it's really important that people who are creating entertainment are allowed to create whatever type of entertainment they like. You can turn up the audio on the game, that'd be great. Yeah. Won't talk over the last few moments here.
You've got to clear out those SAM sites. Go! Knock out those!
SAM site destroyed.
The SAMs are history! This is Eagle Claw 1, starting attack run. This is Eagle Base. I'm not risking any more pilots. We have a GPS lock on the Nod installation. Prepare for ion cannon strike.
And then one of the great things about the Command and Conquer world is that you have Star Wars as a reality, so we're calling in a satellite strike here to take out that enemy base, to finish them off. Some pretty fun stuff. If you're playing the other side, you get nukes, but we don't need to go there. And then we have the hero shot. This is actually where the camera's now been taken away from the player. And that kind of sums up the first little mini level there. Okay, there you go. So that's Renegade. Just now shipping that product, and now I'll get right onto the body of my talk. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to probably terminate that, or it's going to end up. Oh no, good. All right, I won't have to. Okay. So here's the process. Again, this was a much longer talk, but here's the process that we go through when it comes to building a game. These are not by any means like hard and fast rules that everybody does. Westwood Studios is, as I said, part of Electronic Arts. It is the world's largest entertainment software company. It's about $2 billion of annual revenues, so it makes it a pretty big company, period. And these are the steps that are used by most Electronic Arts studios, not even by all of them. The company develops products that are distributed in 75 countries around the world. We do products in Westwood for 5 or 6 languages at least, sometimes many more. So these are just happen to be our particular 10 points. I don't know that you would find exactly these 10 steps, but you would find similar types of phases at any development studio, especially ones that are in the sort of high-end hits business. The games industry is very much like film or television. It's all about hits. You make a hit, something like Command & Conquer, we sold 15 million copies worldwide, you're on top of the world. Most people don't do that. Most people do something that's under 100,000, they spend a few $1 million and they lose money. There are very few companies that can successfully make money year on year. And I think a rigid design process is actually one of the reasons Electronic Arts is so successful and one of the reasons Westwood continues to be so successful. So I'm going to focus a lot, like I said, on really the first parts, the concept and the pre-production. And there's a flow chart here. I don't think you can really read this very well. But I think it gives you a good idea that there's a strong process and a strong sense of how you go about making a product. Again, these are probably not rigidly followed in all studios. It is rigidly followed in our studio. So I can tell you as a general manager that every single project goes through this process. And you'll see sort of a flow chart where we have this loop that we keep going back until we get an approval on the original concept, and then we move on to pre-production, and that continues the loop until we get approval on pre-production. This is where the bulk of the game design should happen. When products take 4 or 5 years, that's because we didn't do this step properly. They should be a couple of years at most. And I'll get into detail all of this, but it's actually 2 pages. So the first one wasn't daunting enough. There's more. But it does. At the very end is obviously the actual... And the funny part is, I want to point this out. After all of these steps right here, this is the design, basically. So from here on is actually building the product. So all of this stuff that was on the board for the first 2 is before you actually start coding the game. So the first part, concept. This is the studio level funding. Basically, you have to come up with a high concept document. I'm approached all the time by people who say, I have this idea for a game, right? And I'm sure that people who make movies, get a lot of people who come to them, I have this idea for a movie. But an idea is only really so good on its own. Sometimes it can be very novel, but without the ability to distribute or to develop that idea fully, it's just an idea. It doesn't really carry much weight. So the high concept, as important as it is, has to be backed up by some experience and backed up by some ability to deliver it. The high concept is really the defining idea that tells you why it's exciting about this product and that it's easily communicated. So it has to be something really short. It's like 1 page, and it has like the first 3 sentences. If you read the first 3 sentences to somebody, they have to say, wow, that's exciting. In the case of Renegade, what you just saw was, hey, you get to play Command & Conquer, which is a very famous series of games, but you get to be right there on the battlefield making the decisions for your troops. That feels pretty exciting. When we add on top of that the sort of multiplayer side of it, which is team versus team, base versus pace, it starts to get really exciting, and people want to buy that product. They want to play that product. Then what happens is you go through a series of tests. So you create this page document, and I've never seen a product that doesn't go through at least 10 or 15 iterations of the high concept document. I've never had anybody write the first one that didn't think it was done. So it just goes and goes and goes and goes until finally you get it sorted. And what you do is you go to people and you say, here it is. And I don't know if anybody saw the movie The Producers, but I love the movie because Tim Robbins is doing this circle, and he draws a circle and he goes, for kids. And so nobody got it, right? It was a hula hoop. But that's really what it's all about, is do people get it? So it's not just about communicating. It's about communicating it quickly. Do people understand the concept? Does it really excite them? And then this little thing here, this is actually an EA acronym. It's called CRUDE analysis. Credible, relevant, unique, defensible, and easy to understand. And my apologies on the capitalization. I screwed that up. But anyways, so each one of those things, I won't get into a lot of detail, but I think they're pretty self-explanatory in the sense that your game has to be credibly exciting. So you can't say, we're going to do this thing, and then have no way of backing that up, something impossible or something that's not imaginable. We're going to make the most exciting and in-depth game where we completely simulate reality. Well, okay, that's probably not exciting anyways, but it's not very credible. Then you have to have relevance. Why is it relevant in the market? So if you just said, well, we're going to make a first-person shooter game, that's not very relevant. There's a lot of those out there. So you need to come up with something that's interesting about that and why it's relevant now. And that falls right into unique. What's unique about your product? In Game Developer Magazine, just this recent issue, there was a big discussion about people, at the very end, there was a rant or a rave, where the guy says, why does it the publishers need a hook? And he went on and on about how good games don't necessarily have to have hooks, and I strongly disagree. You can succeed with a game that's kind of good across the board or does lots of things well. You may even have some degree of measured success. You will not be a breakaway hit without some unique element, something that people can talk about and say, this game does X. And this X has to be something that you just haven't ever seen before or ever been able to experience before. Maybe you saw it in films, maybe you read about it in books, but you haven't played a game like that before. So that's the unique. And defensible is, again, can you defend the assertion of the rest of this? So if you say that you're going to make the best first-person shooter, that's not very defensible unless you're John Carmack or one of these guys like Todd Sweeney that do that all the time and beat the market. And the last one is easy to understand. If I have to sit there and explain it 15 or 20 minutes, it's a lost cause. You'll never get a game out and onto the market that people can't get in a sentence or 2 or 3. The last part of the testing is, have you bounce the ideas off of others? Now, it's important you don't get too many people involved here because design by committee is a sure way to kill a project. But at the same time, you really do have to bounce your ideas off other people. You really have to get some other input. I know a couple of guys, I won't mention their names, that have built a game. They spent 4.5 years building a game. When we talked to the designer, he said, hey, I got this great idea for the game, and I've done 5 others, and so this is going to be fantastic. And everybody kind of looked at each other, and it's like, this has been done. So A, he hasn't been playing games lately, and B, he hasn't bounced the idea off anybody. And when told, well, that's been done, it's not exciting anymore, he just sort of dug in his heels and continued to make the product. We didn't buy that product, we didn't fund it. Somebody else did, it failed. And that's because he just was too absorbed in his own creativity. He didn't want to bounce those ideas. Really important to get other people's feedback. And then keep the development group small at this point. When you're talking about a concept, concepts move all over the place. So if you're starting off that concept, you want a couple people, 3 people, 4 people, whatever, not a lot. Core people know games, know how they're doing things. Even if you've never made a game before, surround yourself with a couple people who have, and make it really a small group to refine that concept. And the last part is delineate between original, sequel, and ports. And this is really a key one. I see many presentations about development that take a sort of perspective, and they may never have made an original product. So you really have to decide, are you doing an original, a sequel, or a port, and define your high concept based on those things. Because nobody wants to read on a sequel, it's going to be just like game X, and that's it. They want to know why it's different, why it's exciting. On ports, they don't want to know, oh, it's going to be this game on another system. That's obvious. So you need to figure out which one of these pieces, or what your product is all about, and tailor your presentation for that. And then I'm going to continue on the concept. Pre-visualization, and that's actually what I'm going to show you some of those things today on our next RTS products. So think, brainstorm, and narrow the focus. The last part of that one is probably the biggest idea here. Lots of ideas get kicked around, lots of stuff gets committed to paper. At the end of the day, you have to edit it down and keep editing it down. Later, I'll talk a little bit about filters and explain that a bit. You need to market your product internally. This actually is more for a big company like Electronic Arts. If you're an independent developer, you need to market it. Maybe not internally, but to your venture capitalist or to somebody, I'm sure. And then you need to build that support from whoever it is who's going to support you from the top down, funding, corporate support, as well as from the leads who actually make the product. Defining the leader, every product has a leader. It doesn't have to be the producer, it usually is. It doesn't have to be the lead designer, it should be. But it could be a programmer, it could be anybody. It could be just an outsider that has a great idea. But it has to be a leader mentality, somebody who can get everybody excited, get everybody moving in the right direction, and then they need to get the right people involved. They need to get talented programmers, talented designers, artists, all sorts of different people involved. Then you need to over-communicate this idea to the core team. Having some guy who has it all in his head is a sure sign of death for a project because everybody's waiting on that one individual and he's a bottleneck. You need to over-communicate this idea so everybody can not only get the idea, but also so they can contribute their own disciplines into the product. That's what creates hit products, is when the artist or the art director is contributing artistic concepts. When the game designer is doing the game design, when the programmer is doing it, when you have some producer who's trying to do it all, despite the fact that's how we started our company in '85, it just isn't done today. I don't care how good of a designer, artist, producer, programmer, or audio guy you are, you cannot be world-class at everything. It's just not possible. You want to create a lot of vignettes, and that's really what I'm going to show you today, is just a couple little vignettes of what we're starting to do with unit design on one of our new products. And you want to make sure the concept remains a good fit for your studio. Now, as Westwood Studios, when we were independent, we were called Westwood Associates, we actually would build a product all the way to the point of pre-visualization, and we would go find a publisher that published those types of products, or that would like to publish those types of products. And we used lots of different publishers. Being part of Electronic Arts, it's such a large publisher that you can publish anything. But it still doesn't mean that everything you do is going to be a good fit for that business. And this is where you get into a lot of trouble. People come up with creative ideas, they want to do a thing, and it just may not fit. If you wanted to do a really ultra-violent, I don't know if anybody's played like Grand Theft Auto 3, great game, EA would never publish that game. They just wouldn't do it. It's EA likes to do teen-rated games. That's an adult-rated game and probably should be, or it's a mature, it should have been adult. And they like to do games that promote good social values. That one's all about breaking the law. So that's just not something that EA is going to do. And so no matter how great the idea is, that's a stillborn idea at EA. When we were acquired by Electronic Arts, we had a game called Thrill Kill. We were developing it. And we weren't going to even put Westwood's name on it because we were kind of known for Monopoly and Lion King, and it just wasn't a good fit. But we were going to put a new branding on it. We hadn't come up with a branding yet. And Thrill Kill was a fighting game that was violent in the absurd. So all the things you did were super, super extreme. Everybody at the time was raving about Mortal Kombat, which was just, it was really kind of gratuitous violence. So we said, what if the game's purpose was gratuitous violence? What if that was the comedy? The comedy was violence over the top. That game, the minute Electronic Arts purchased the studio, was immediately stopped, even though it was almost finished. Now, Electronic Arts really does put their money where their mouth is, as it were, because it was a 500,000 unit to $1 million unit seller. Could have generated $15 to $30 million for the studio, for the company. They killed it dead. They didn't sell it to somebody. They didn't do anything with it. They put it on a shelf. It was really unfortunate for the developers that were working on it external because they really wanted to see that product published, but it wasn't a fit for the studio. So this one's kind of important. On originals, and remember I said originals, sequels, ports, you need to understand what the differences are. On originals, you really want to narrow your focus because most originals are destroyed because they have too many ideas, too many things. They end up being this process that's going to take 6 years and 5,000 people to make, and it just never happens. So really it's about finding that one thing or two things that are really critical to the product. On sequels, it's not the same thing. You don't have to worry about the focus so much. You have to focus on what are you going to add to it that people have to be able to do in this game. What have they been wanting to do they're not able to do? And then on ports, you have to define what you're going to improve by moving into another platform or what you're going to lose. I've seen a lot of port products ill-defined in the beginning that end up in deep trouble because the publisher never anticipated losing so many features in the product that just aren't capable on like a Game Boy. And so important to get all this stuff up front in the conceptualization. Okay, still moving on. Vision Communications Package. This is really all about all those things I just said, but how do you actually present this? So I'm not really a very big on PowerPoint jock, but it's a pretty good way of getting information out there, especially when you have the overhead projectors. Regardless of how you do it, you really need to have that refined vision defined and documented for sharing. And you have to have like quick summaries. You have to have things that people can just read and get. You really need to define the X. Don Matrick is the president of the studios for Electronic Arts. He's big on this X concept. What is the game all about? What is the core element of the product? And boy, you better be able to communicate that before you're going to get any funding. And when I said about setting your filters, filters are incredibly important for original products because those are what narrow your focus. You define up front, you say, okay, our game, it's not so much our game is, it's our game isn't. So our game is not about whatever your filter is. In the case of Renegade, we said, okay, our game, is, what was one of them? Okay, so our game is not about swimming. You don't swim in the game, ever. We never let you get in the water. Why did we do that? Well, we needed to narrow the focus. And we felt like blowing up bases, driving around in vehicles, flying things, shooting each other, that was enough. You didn't need to have swimming. So, you're sure to get a review at some point where somebody said, why didn't you do X? You have to pick what you're not going to do. Let's see, where are we? Why EA? This is actually a pretty big thing for Electronic Arts. It's a 3-page document which includes the concept, the pitch, the target market, the summary, the key features, the competitive analysis, the schedule, the team that you're going to use, the budget, and the risks. Now again, before you start doing anything really, you need to have all this stuff defined. Because this is where, and I guess it's changed. Back when games we did our first product, it cost $16,000. We charged $16,000 to do our first game. 2 guys, 4 months. That was good money, right, for us at the time, college student. So it was fine. Nowadays, we're just finishing, Renegade cost about $14 million, the product you just saw. Of course, that wasn't the whole product. And we're doing Earth and Beyond, which should cost about $25 million by the time we're done. So nobody spends millions, tens of millions of dollars without knowing what they're going to get ahead of time. And they're pretty hard about getting it too, because they've put a lot of money up. They want to make sure that they get those return for their investment. The concept document, 3 to 5 pages, a real big expansion on the high concept. And what's more important about the concept doc, it's not so much the size of it, it's actually, I can't remember the guy who, I think it was Mark Twain actually, said that my apologies at the end of this very long letter he wrote, my apologies for writing such a long letter, but I didn't have time to write a short one. right? And I thought it was a great quote because that's exactly what game design is all about. It's exactly what our concept documents are about. If they're 15 pages, that's a good start. Now say the same thing in 10. Now say the same thing in 5. When you get it down to 3, you're probably actually saying something meaningful. And then crude. I told you before about that. Credible, relevant, unique, defensible, easy to understand. I got the caps almost right that time. Resource materials, designer journal, and prototype. Those are all useful things, but I didn't emphasize those a lot because they're not really critical to getting your idea across. They're just useful. If you're sitting in a review with a client, sometimes they want to know where you got that idea. It's great to have numbers to back it up. Get some TRIS data, get some real outside data to back up your ideas. Credibility is important no matter who you are. And now we get into a little bit of visuals. So here's one of the first early designs we did. Now this, I wish I had all the ones that we went through. This one character, this one little drawing here, probably went through 20 individual character designs before we got this. Now, when you consider that this guy in an RTS game is looked at from the top down, he's about as big as an ant. It's an amazing amount of work that goes into just defining this character. But there's more to the character than just, immediately meets the eye. We really wanted a next generation soldier. We had this whole idea of an environment suit, and we wanted some really clean lines. These guys, we talk a lot about the philosophy of the different sides. We define each one of the sides by many different filters. So GDI in our next game concept, they're the guys that are the advanced military. They've got good funding, but they tend to be more like grunt-oriented. They're the evolution of American military. They actually come from, there's an orbiting station, an orbiting satellite station, that they come down in dropships into the hot zones and land in. And they do an incursion extraction type of combat. So they had to have environment suits that would protect the soldiers. We wanted them to look kind of cool and edgy, but we wanted them to feel like human beings that had armor on. And when we put all the armor on the guys, it just looked like it had been done before. So we went through many, many revisions of the kind of aliens, Marines character. And like I said, I wish I had all the revs. I don't have all the revs because the daily system that we were using wasn't installed until we got to this point. I would mention that, at Westwood we do dailies on all of our artwork, which means as an artist changes their stuff, they check it in. And I can go onto a web page and bring up the artwork, and I can actually look at all the revisions. So if I want to know what a particular piece of concept art looked like 3 months ago, I can just pull it up. And that ability to go in and out, this databases, is incredibly powerful. It's a tool that was created by Electronic Arts. I can't tell you how much time it saves. When we were working on The Lion King, I was sitting in Orlando with Jeffrey Katzenberg and Don Hahn and a bunch of the other guys that were actually building the film, making the film. And I watched them go through the dailies process of an animated film. And if anybody hasn't seen that, it's amazing. How much effort goes into every single day reviewing every single piece of animation, refining, and refining it. So here's my first visual example. Next one is all sorts of guys for the Cabal units. Now, Cabal is a totally different side. Obviously, it doesn't even look like the same, or maybe it doesn't look like the same game because these particular units are robots. They're created by an artificial intelligence called Cabal, which we had created. And the Command & Conquer universe is really about two things, the Global Defense Initiative and the Brotherhood of Nod. So one of the things I was asked recently is, well, you guys keep doing Command & Conquer games, and you created that in 1995. Isn't that getting tired, or why is it still relevant to the market? So in 1995, we said, you know what, in fact, actually the hotspot that we started with was Angola. And we said, the world is in a place right now where it seems obvious that all these nations are going to get together because the real threat is no longer one nation or another. It's really about terrorism. And that's really going to be the future of warfare, is going to be fighting terrorists. This is 1995. So we said, what's going to happen is this charismatic leader is going to come out of nowhere. He's going to band together a lot of people that don't have a lot of money. They're going to attack this with a religious zeal, and they're going to become a brotherhood. And that's why we called them the Brotherhood of Nod. And I admit, completely, this was all fiction. We had no way of knowing that any of this would occur. And we said they're probably going to get things from they're probably going to get all their materials from previous war countries that have fallen down. Like maybe at that time we speculated that maybe Russia falls. Now in 1995 that wasn't a very obvious thought, but maybe Russia or China or these places. And that's what's going to cause all this military equipment. And this charismatic leader will build them up and they will assault the world. They will attack America. They will attack the Western European countries. And that's actually what we created in 1995. And it's unfortunately all too familiar nowadays. The GDI that I keep talking about is called Global Defense Initiative. And I have to tell you, it was a bit of a chill down my spine when I read in the paper the other day, President Bush is calling for a global defense initiative against terrorism. I said, ooh, okay, we make games. I don't want to we're not making social commentary. But it is still very relevant. Now, Cabal is a totally science fiction sort of idea, an artificial intelligence that has been born of computers being networked together. And his units are actually created right out of this material called Tiberium, which is our fictional wonder clay that you can make anything out of. So his units had to look like a computer intelligence that wants to wipe out human beings and really doesn't care much. It's very much like a Terminator Skynet type of idea. And so the unit design is very, very different, very creepy, and we wanted to make sure that it had a sort of a sense of insectoid type of ideas and an efficiency or cold efficiency to it that didn't look like a human being had actually created it. Went through many, many revisions on the Cabal units. And we're still building them, by the way. The interface screen. On Command & Conquer games, there's this big panel on the side. On Warcraft, it's along the bottom, along with Age of Empires. We had this idea of we really want to bring it into 3D, so these panels move up and down independently. This, again, went through many, many revisions. Something as simple as how you click on the game is actually really critical to the game, and it's a big part of the design. How do people interface with your product? Okay, so here's a screenshot from the next CNC RTS. Now, this is not our product. This is not Las Vegas, that is. It's a product being done from the Westwood Studios in Irvine, California, who are now calling themselves EA Pacific. So probably shouldn't have the Westwood Studios logo on there. But anyways, those guys are working on the next generation of RTS product. It's a 3D engine. And they had some early concepts. Now, these are actually, there's going to be a big announcement this week about this product, and there's going to be new screenshots. These are quite old. These are about 4 or 5 months old. But I have 2 shots. And again, strong sense of style and design that's been put into the product. The camera's a little closer. You can see the units. This is the game Command & Conquer, the 15 million unit seller. The game that you saw before this was putting you on the battlefield in this universe. So to give you guys a sense of context. So for our next one, after that product, we said, okay, well, we want to do something a little different. So we want to have these mobile units. And this is literally the beginning. And this one I actually did find all our old reference. So we started with really blocky shapes. And we went through dozens of different ones before we came up on something. We said, yeah, that kind of looks neat. A half track that opens into a tower. That could be pretty cool. And then it took a next evolution step here where there was a lot more detail added to the actual unit design and a kind of rough idea of what it might look like by the time it gets in the game. And this is the actual, because our artists can't leave it alone at these quick little concepts, they want to be able to do something a little bit more exciting. So this is actually a shot from a fictional camera point, because we really won't put the camera here. It's going to be from above. But it gives you an idea of what this unit might look like in a really stormy environment. And you can actually see the whole animation to it. And my apologies for the compression codec. It makes it kind of grainy. But you can see that, in fact, actually, I'll run that a couple times. You can see that there was a great deal of effort put into making this thing kind of crawl its way out of a truck into something that looks a little bit more exciting. And I don't have the firing sequence on here and everything else, but all of that goes through design. Now, again, this stuff goes through many, many, many iterations before we finally get to the point of a full product. Now, one of the things we pointed out to the artist was the camera's not going to be there. So it's kind of important that we see this thing from above. And can we get rid of the rain and the smoke and all that, because that stuff hides in multitude of sins. We want to do something broad daylight from above that looks more like the actual game camera. And so here it is. And there's some evolution that's been happening even on the object now. You'll notice the cab has angles on it. It's actually been beveled. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to make it look more like a lookout tower after it was created. And so the cab didn't look quite right sitting up on top of this column. So I'll go ahead and animate this one too. And you can get a better idea of what's happening on the unit as it goes through. In fact, I even think it loads up a shell here too, which is part of its loading sequence. Yep, there you go at the end. And you can see now that kind of tapered cab works much better as a tower now than it did before as a cab of things. This, by the way, I mean, this is not done. This unit will go through, this is really very much a work in progress. Literally was done Friday. So this is going to go through 2 or 3 more revisions before we even get to a point where we say, okay, that one unit is done. That's one artist's been working on this for a month and a half. So the games will have between we'll probably end up with about 60 or 70 building units like this, mobile units, and we'll end up with about the same number of actual running around units. And then we'll have hundreds of buildings, hundreds of like skyscrapers, churches, and stuff like that. So you can imagine the amount of man hours that goes into this kind of stuff. And just you literally have to touch everything. You have to go through and put those filters, the design filters, on every little aspect of the game. I'll run this one again because this is actually kind of all the video stuff I have in my presentation. And you can see there's actually a lot of stuff, like the little lights that are going on here, the reflections in the water. A lot of stuff is implied, the way that the units move about. You'll see the way the gun comes through here and lands up, and the rotating shell loading device there. All this stuff has to be thought through and designed. Like I said, that's it for graphics, so my apologies. The rest of it is going to be nice dry text and me babbling on. Pre-production, the next step. So all the things I just showed you were really about visualization. We hadn't even gotten into, in fact, this March 13th is when we were going to pitch this idea to EA and say, can we have $10 million to make this game? So you guys are really getting the inside track. This is going to be a product that, if it gets built, which is no guarantee it will get built, if it gets built, it won't ship until the end of calendar 2003. So a long time from now. Here's the pre-production step. So providing you get funding and everybody gets excited about the project, we go to the collaborative design meeting, which is a 2-day or 2-week undisturbed session. We sit down and we go through the vision plans by discipline, and we do post-mortem reviews. So this means the artists, the programmers, the designers, everybody goes through and says, here's my discipline, here's what I think we need to do, and we read what we did right and wrong from the previous products. This is really important, because if you don't look at your mistakes, you're destined to repeat them. Somebody else said that, but you get the idea. Define the truths, 5 to 10 things that will not change. That's actually one of the most important things you can do, because early on you have all these brainstorming sessions, you come up with all these ideas. Well, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, we could do that. And then you end up at the end of the day going, yeah, you could do anything. Well, what have we decided to do? What have we decided not to do? That's really important. In fact, I usually put the things that will not change, things that we won't do, but that was filters earlier. We prioritize the features by discipline and market bullet points. So we literally break it down and say, to the artist, the most important thing is real-time reflections, or the most important thing is specular highlights, or whatever it is. And we start with all those features, and then we cut that across. The audio guys want, a changeable sound design, whatever. And then finally, we do an engineering reality check. So all the engineers go through, break down the whole process, and say, okay, that's a great game idea, guys, but it's going to take 17 engineers 5 years to do that, so let's go back and filter that again. Then we do a pre-production plan, which is where we define the pre-production, the deliverables, the core team, the accountability. We define some way of doing rapid prototyping. We're using Maya for the sequences you just saw. And then we do the interdependencies. So we show where the pipelines lock together and where an artist might be waiting for a technological piece or vice versa. And then we do pre-production schedule. So it's very boring. Microsoft project. It's built from the plan that we built. I'm not going to show a project up here because that's just, it just puts everybody to sleep immediately. But it's incredibly important. And then we publish our pre-production plan, our schedule, and our unified product vision for critiques, basically, to all the different departments. And it does take a while. And if this sounds like an awful lot of paperwork to make a game, it is. But it's not an awful lot of paperwork to invest millions of dollars into an entertainment medium. And if you think that movies or anybody else goes and whips out their checkbook for a couple $1,000,000 on the back of a napkin, it doesn't happen. At least I've never seen it happen. If you know who's doing that, let me know. I'd be happy to take their money. The game design document is the next part, which is really the story with the cast of characters, desired features, key moments, audio, visual, gameplay, GI flow, and walkthroughs for level design, audio, and visual. The game design document it's not really the blueprint. And a lot of people talking about the blueprint. The technical design document is really more the blueprint, the plans of how to build something. The game design document is more of the vision. It's what do you want to build? It'd be sort of like the architectural renderings of here's a elevation of the building. We want it to be gorgeous. We want it to use light in this way. And then you have some guy who has to be busy trying to sift that all out and make it work. The pre-visualization, concept art, rapid prototyping, again, kind of covered those. And then the material presentation for the GDD, which is where you actually go through and say, okay, we have 3 sides in this game. Here's the features of each of the sides. Here's what's exciting about them. Here's what's not exciting. Or here's the way you play each one of those sides. The technical design, as I said, this is really the blueprint. It has a project summary, analysis breakdown, all the specifications, what your development environment is going to be, what kind of computers you're using, what kind of software, resources, how many people we're going to need, standards and practices. There's coding standards issue that's really important. And then it also talks about the game architecture, the software architecture behind it. Content pipelines, which is what tools you're going to use and how those assets get into the game. Technology and risk analysis, and then the task breakdown and analysis. Those are pretty straightforward, where your risks are, where your biggest risks are from a technical point of view, and how your tasks break down. The last thing is dependency summary, which shows you if something goes sideways, what's it going to affect, and then the milestone summary at the end. Media design and visualization, this is where we enroll a lot, or we engage a lot of design elements, because here's where we talk about what the goals are for the media. When we did games like Blade Runner, the most important thing to me when building Blade Runner wasn't that it had X number of polygons or that it ran at this resolution or any of that. I was a big fan of Ridley Scott, still am. And what I loved about Ridley Scott's films is that he can drive this sense of tension, and he doesn't have to use action to do it. Black Hawk Down aside, when you watch the original Alien, the movie, scared the crap out of you, and you never had a monster jumping out in your face. Very rarely. Once every 20 minutes or so, there would be some piece of action. But it really kept you tense, and Blade Runner was the same way. You watch this movie, and you believe that at any moment, this character somebody could jump out of the shadows and wax him. And that tension kept you on the edge of your seat, even though nothing was happening. So when we meant to make the game, what was most important to me, although visual design was important, it was so important that we captured that sense of tension, that sense of the unknown. And that's why we went about building the product the way we did. We took a very different approach to it. When we're building our next RTS product, what I also wanted to produce was that same sense of that gnawing tension where you just don't know what's going to happen. And so what's really important is that we make sure to surprise the player, not in ways that devastate them and make them lose, but that keeps them on the edge of their seat. So media goals, this all stuff is pretty dry, but it's really important. Who do I report to? When are we going to have meetings? When are the reviews? How we do our asset management. I talked a little bit about the dailies process, where we have a big database that keeps track of all these assets. Our branding issues, how do we brand CNC? What's important about that? And then the actual media production. This is all, again, server directory structure. I mean, this is really important for internal development, probably totally uninteresting to you guys. And the localization considerations, really important too. Now, we make a product that sells in 75 countries. We do about 5 or 6 different languages. It's really critical we don't like Mad Libs. Because if you threw a bunch of Mad Libs together, guess what? Other languages don't parse out the same way as English, and you end up in big trouble. You can't do that. So you have to figure out other ways to get around those problems. We decide, yeah. It's like just about here is where we say, what kind of computer platforms are we going to use? What kind of languages are we going to deliver it in? With Monopoly, we did it in 9 languages. And each time we did a different language, we did a custom board, because each one of the territories we shipped it in had different properties on the board and different currency. So our English version, we couldn't sell the American version in England, because in England, it was Waddington's Monopoly, and you had, Trafalgar Square and Buckingham Palace, and you had, Holland Gate. These are places that don't exist in, of course, Atlantic City. So every territory had to be different. And then, of course, we had to decide what platforms as well. Is it going to be on the PC? Is it going to be on the game consoles? Which game consoles? In the case of Lion King, I did it on both the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and the Genesis. And that was the same product on both platforms, which had all kinds of challenges with it. But those were the 2 we chose because those were the ones we felt had the best market potential. Visualization. So I usually talk an awful lot about this stuff because this is actually where my heart and soul lie, which is the beat charts, the emotional, the visual, and the gameplay. But I'm running like really longer than I wanted to, so I like to have time for Q&A. So I won't get into it too much, but the beat charts are another way of saying, I don't know if anybody's taken like a Robert McKee course or a screenwriting course, but classic story structure. You break things down into plays. I like to use a play structure. I like to go with a 3, 5, or 7 act play. Generally, if it's 7 acts, you just figure out which 2 you get rid of. And I try to go with a kind of classic story structure where the first act is an upbeat, You feel good about it. You feel good about yourself. The story seems to be going right. The second act is a downbeat. You're feeling troubled. It's not quite going the way you want. And then the next one is even a higher upbeat. The next one's even a lower downbeat. And the last one is this really high upbeat. And the velocity, the amplitude of those experiences has to go up over time, as well as the emotional charge. So I don't remember who gave this talk at the University of Las Vegas, but an artist gave a talk, and he was talking about what it means to be an artist. Everybody calls himself an artist. So what does it mean to be an artist? And he had the best description of art I've ever heard, which is the intentional evocation of emotion is being an artist, when you can intentionally create emotion. So in the viewer, in the audience. So in the case of all of our products, in every product I've ever done, I've always built an emotional chart. And I said, when the person starts playing the game, what are they going to feel within the first couple of minutes? So you just saw this Renegade demo. What do we want to make you feel? Well, first of all, we start off with a little cinematic scene to make you realize there are good guys, there are bad guys, right? It's all about war. It's going to be intense. And we talk about the commando. We're going to send in one commando to save these guys. We immediately set you up to be this hero. This character is undefeatable. And that's what we build up on. You come into the scene, they're all getting destroyed, and you just come in and mop them all up, and you feel great. By the time you get to the end, you bring down a big cannon from space, and you're unstoppable. We wanted you to end that mission on an incredible high. I guarantee you, if none of you have even played a 3D action game before, you play that, you will succeed in that first mission. Maybe not the very first time, but certainly the second time you try. It's that easy. But it doesn't feel easy. It feels exciting. It feels tense. In fact, until you play it the second or third time, you realize, I was never getting shot. All those guys are shooting each other. They're not shooting at me. If I have to literally walk in the way of the bullets to get hit. And that's literally what you have to do. But sure enough, somebody stands right next to the APC when it gets blown up. Every now and then they die. But not very often. Most of the time, they're running around taking cover and they're shooting at the guys and they're all freaked out. And you watch them and you're like, just stand there. They're not shooting at you. You know? But it doesn't matter. The emotion was there. It was sold. Now, that doesn't work for the second level. Right? It only works for the first one because you did it the second time. Pretty soon people get wise. And it's not fun anymore. So on the second level, actually, by my whole beat chart, the second one is supposed to be a little bit of a downer. It's supposed to be really challenging. So the second one is a really long level that takes a lot of effort. And by the time you get to the end of it, you've really learned how to play the game. So it's a tutorial lesson that teaches you how the different mechanics of the game. And it's a bit of a challenge. And that's okay, because that means that we're on the right emotional beat. The third level, boy, you get right inside some vehicles and you kick major butt. And that feels great. Okay, so those are very intentional, very, very specific emotional responses that we're trying to get out of the players. And it cannot be overestimated how important that is. And I talk about the beat charts. The beat charts are not just emotional beats, it's also gameplay beats. So you cannot introduce new elements to people at too quick of a rate. Anybody here, actually this is a great sort of aside, anybody here read the first couple of issues of Wired magazine? I don't know if any of you could have gotten those. Well, there's one. So when you get the first issue to Wired magazine, and you've never seen it before, this was their original format, it wasn't readable. Right? It was a horrible layout. I mean, this design was just miserable. I mean, you're reading, you're like, what? The text starts here and it goes over there, and then it's like flip to the next page, go back to the previous. Oh my God, it's a mess. But they were very avant-garde. They broke through the formatting and the layout that you had seen, because there was such a standard formula. Every magazine, you'd flip through them and you wouldn't even read the stuff anymore. They challenged you. It made it hard to read, but it focused you on the material. They changed their format pretty quickly thereafter, because once it got old, it got really annoying. But it was great. It was a great, fresh approach. So when it comes to style guides, those are really important lessons to learn. You can break the rules, or you can make it like an action game. We just made an action game that there was no action, really. You could just stand there. In fact, actually, the really funny thing is if you just walk into the middle of that first area, that ambush area, and you just stand there and do nothing, eventually all your guys shoot all the other guys, and you move on. Right? So you can do nothing and win. Right? In fact, you have to try to kill yourself. You know, but that's important. Again, all about the style, all about making sure the accessibility. You know, one of the things we wanted to make sure is that when people played that game the first time, I don't know if anybody here plays computer games. If you go to play Counter-Strike, you go on the web, you walk up, your game starts, you get killed. And then you say, okay, I'll sort this out. And then you go and you play it again, and you last about 2 seconds, you get killed. And you keep working your way up to about 10 or 15 seconds, dying every single time, until eventually you last about 20 seconds, you say, okay, I got it. And you start the very next game, 2 seconds later, you're dead. So you just don't get any sense of being able to accomplish this. And it's really horrible because it's debilitating, and people don't want to play this anymore. They're like, forget it. It's like going one-on-one with, Michael Jordan. This is not a fun basketball experience. You want to be able to win. So one of the things I really have against all of our industry is that many, many times we make our products just too damn hard. It's great for the guy who plays lots of games. It's terrible for somebody who's never played one before. Anyways, I'm waxing on now. I'm off my slide. So the development schedule, again, I'm going to move quickly through this stuff because it's really dry, but it's really important. You know, define your milestones. Make sure they're regular every single month. You need to make your tasks assigned to individuals. You don't just leave these nebulous tasks. You make sure your estimates are not just estimates for the amount of time, but it's actually the amount of effort too, because that can give you a weighting so you can measure a risk. And again, you see that word dependencies. I can't tell you how many times, you know, if you got 3 guys or 5 guys making a product, it's not a big deal if one guy kind of slows everybody down. It takes an extra week. If you got 25 or 35 people and suddenly somebody's a roadblock, you're costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars every month. That can be huge. Dependencies is incredibly important. Production schedule, we actually use MS Project and we do Project Central, which links it all through a web page so everybody can contribute. And then we go through the milestone definitions, development milestones, external milestones. This is, forget that's internal description actually. PSM is just the dates that we would communicate to the rest of the organization. This is it then, game design review, technical design review, and media design review. These are the 3 questions that are asked at the end of the design session. So things well understood or are explained well, that's the game design, explain the game. What are the risks and what are the solutions for the technical design? And then what will it look like and how do we build the content is the media design. And each of these things, each one of these documents is a very thick, well thought through document before we ever start. And then at that point, we publish all of these. They go through an approval process, and then we communicate it. We talk about, we do it creatively. We use proven methods. We communicate early and often to the team and to the organization. We communicate up. This is important to big companies. You have to tell your bosses what you're doing, because if they don't hear from you after a while, they think you're not doing anything. Right? It's kind of basic logic. People say out of sight, out of mind. It's like out of sight, not funded. Out of funding really fast. Your cross-discipline communication is really important. Make sure the programmers know what the artists are doing. Artists know what the programmers are doing. Don't develop products in separate pieces. And then awareness. Build awareness within the team, awareness within the organization, and awareness in the industry of what you're doing. Then we get into production, which is the milestones. This is boring stuff, but it's important. Build it every month, play it every month, present it every month. If it's not in the presentable, playable version, it's not done. So if an artist does a great piece of artwork and they go, oh, I'm done with this piece of artwork, it's like, is it in the game? No. Okay, you didn't do it. Until it's in the game, you didn't do it. So you have to make sure everybody gets it in the product. And then you tackle your key features first and eliminate your risks first. Then at the bottom line, we have actually these terms in our industry called alpha, beta, and final. Alpha literally means the game is done and there are no more tasks to do. And many people play fast and loose with this term. It really means the game is done and there are no more tasks to do. People always have one more thing they want to throw into alpha. You really shouldn't be touching the game after alpha. Beta means the team thinks it's done. And now you have to go through all these processes. And all these little acronyms mean something. Quality assurance means the game doesn't have a horrible number of bugs, so when people buy it, they'll actually be able to play it. CQC is customer quality control. EA has this process I don't think many publishers do. It's incredibly important because whereas this one tells you, is the game fun, is it working, is it playing? This one is the disc that you're actually manufacturing, does it work? You have no idea how many times in our history, especially prior to EA, we would have products get right to the manufacturing plant and find out that they had the wrong version. One example of this was EA shipped Tiger Woods Golf, and these people had a South Park cartoon filling the data disk to test the links of the media, and they forgot to delete it. So they published Tiger Woods Golf with a South Park, here's a G-rated game, goes out with if you just browse the disk, there's a compressed file, you could play it, and there was a South Park cartoon. Really bad news. They had to pull a bunch of product and everything else. So CQC is supposed to catch that stuff. Language testing as LT, that means just because you did it in German doesn't mean it really works in German. You have to get somebody who actually knows German to play it. And then verify is to verify that what you think you put on the disk is actually what's on the disk, and that's the gold master process, GM. And then finally, your documentation. All of that has to be done as well. Then final, the live date. After you ship a product nowadays, because of all the multiplayer stuff, you've just started your pain. Because actually once you ship it, then everybody gets to play with it, and everybody wants to have fixes to it, or they think it's out of balance, or they're playing a multiplayer version, they want new vehicles, and that's an actual whole production process. And then last, after it's all said and done, you get to sit there and kind of bare your soul and talk about what went right, what went wrong, which people on the team were jerks, who were great, who were the heroes, and then you create a transition plan with who's going on to the next project and what your learning was. And finally, you publish all of that and you share and discuss, because that rolls right back into the next product. So that's the end of my presentation. And hey, what do you know? And I'm ready for Q&A if folks would like to go through it. So that's it. Anybody have any questions? One right up here.
So, okay, please
Is it
use
too-
the microphone. So we have some time for, and I really hope you
Yep.
use this opportunity, because it's fairly rare to have a person like Luis here with us. So if you have any such questions you always wanted to ask from a game designer and developer, so this is the right chance.
Hi. Is it actually harder, production-wise, to create a game like Lion King where it's based on something than it is for you guys to come up with something completely different, where you don't have to answer to anyone but yourselves?
Yeah, so I'll repeat it, I think. Can everybody hear that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll try not to rephrase the question so as to avoid answering it, because I'm not a very good politician, but I think I know what you're asking, which is basically, is it easier to make a product based on an existing material property, or is it easier just to make up your own thing? And I've done both. They're both really hard to do because, and in fact, actually, I've talked a lot with the sports guys at EA. So there's three things. One is a sports game, which the game is well defined, but the product isn't. Then there's an existing property like The Lion King, Blade Runner, Monopoly, where the property is well defined, but there is no game necessarily. And then you have just totally original idea like Command and Conquer. So the challenge, it seems like it would be easier to do a sports game or a game based on a property, but the reality is you have an obligation, in the case of a sports game, to recreate the fantasy of the person playing the sport. That's actually really hard to do, and in fact, it has all its own challenges. But the good news is you don't have to decide what soccer is. You don't have to decide what basketball is. You already have that decided for you. So I think on the plus side, you know what you're trying to get to, but what you're trying to get to is pretty hard because it's an emotional experience that people have, and usually a love affair with a particular sport. In the case of a property, I'm a big advocate that not every property makes for a game. So some people think that anything can be turned into a product. Somehow there's got to be an interactive game here somewhere. Not necessarily, in my opinion. If the experience that was communicated in the other medium lends itself to participation from a viewer, then there's a game there. If it's something that really is you're inside somebody's head a lot, and there's a lot of psychological stuff, like there's been a ton of books that have come out where you're inside the character's head. Those don't make for very good games because you can't tell somebody what they're thinking. And it's really hard to have somebody go through emotional evolution in a game. You want them to be doing something. But in some cases, the action-oriented films are not necessarily good games either. Like a good one would be like Cliffhanger. It's probably not a good film because the action sequences are not really something that people are going to have an interactive thing with. In the case of Blade Runner, the whole reason that I wanted to make this as a game was I felt that was a world that really Scott had created, and an emotional experience, this not knowing who's real, knowing who's a replicant, all this. I thought that was someplace that would be really exciting to be a detective in, because it would be a very challenging detective problem to try to figure out, are these people real or are they replicants? And if you made them always the same people who are real replicants, somebody would make a hint book that would just tell you. So it implied that you had to change that every time so that people would not know. So in the case of Command & Conquer, a totally original idea, you have to filter it all the way down. So to answer the question more directly, neither is easier, but they're very different processes. In the case of original products, it's take all these wonderful ideas and focus them down to something that is clean, easy to describe, and exciting. That's a very big problem because you usually have too many ideas and too many constraints. In the case of films or books or something like that, it's really about understanding what's core about that property. In the case of Monopoly, people want to trade. I can't tell you how many Monopoly games were done before we did it where the computer didn't trade intelligently. What's the point? Monopoly without trading is really boring, right? In fact, we called it monotony for a while. And then you have finally with something like a sports game, which is really a challenge because in the case of a sports game, you're trying to create the fantasy of being a great sports star. And how do you do that? How do you make that fun? If it's too easy, then people go, it's too easy. If it's too hard, then, I can't play this. It's very difficult. Yes? I can repeat the questions, actually, too.
Yes. Okay, let's use it.
Okay. Okay.
Well, you're obviously a very knowledgeable businessman. I'm wondering how you perceive your proximity to the culture when teen anger crime, hits the bylines and, the government seems to recommend self-censure, which it seems everyone is falling into that boat quite happily. I'm just wondering, as an active business person, how you perceive your proximity to culture, what you feel your effect is on...
So what is our effect on violence and...
On how the culture thinks.
Okay. So I don't know if... Please rephrase the question if I don't answer it, because I'm not trying to... I don't want to... Yeah, so our philosophy, or my personal philosophy, is that I'm making an entertainment experience. And it's really important that I'm responsible in the way that I label that entertainment experience. I'm a parent. I have my kids. I'm aghast when parents buy their kids Kingpin because they think it's a bowling game, and it turns out to be, an adult, practically X-rated, violent and verbal product. Now, it's fine if you've got a well-adjusted teenager, but if you're 8 years old or 9 years old, that's just not appropriate. And they pick up all kinds of new words. So I personally feel it's really important to label your products responsibly. The thing that I feel like we've fallen apart as an industry, and I'm happy to say over the last 2 years it's gotten much better, because I used to give a talk on this, and I was a pariah for a while because I would go up there as a game developer and go, the problem is we act like we care, and then we don't. We say we care, and then we don't act like it, because game companies were advertising adult-rated and mature-rated games on Nickelodeon. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can't do that and say that you're being responsible. Fortunately, the Game Developers Association, in conjunction with the ESRB, have now put constraints on the publishers, self-governing body within our industry, that require them that you cannot advertise products on mediums that are out of the target audience by a certain percentage. So it actually now, to get an ESRB rating on your game, and if you don't have a rating, Walmart won't ship it, Best Buy won't ship it, a bunch of products. So we got the retailers to have the teeth, and then the ESRB went in and said, okay, to get those ratings on your games, now it's no longer appropriate for you to advertise in these mediums. It's no longer appropriate for the retail outlets. If you sell a game that's mature and they catch a retail outlet that's selling mature games to kids that are underage without asking for identification, the ESRB will put them on notice, and they'll literally tell the publishers, you can't ship to this retailer anymore unless they fix their act. So I would say, philosophically, it's important that we label it properly, we educate the public, and that the retailers follow up with the support, and that we don't advertise it in the wrong places. And if we do all those things, we're actually the most responsible of all the entertainment mediums. I am a firm believer it is not appropriate to censor. So, and I would say of any material, of any entertainment, if it's, there's some things that I think are morally reprehensible that ought to be censored and illegal, which they already are. So when it comes to children crimes and things like that. That, of course. But aside from that, when it comes to content, if I'm making content for an adult, I should be free to do so as long as it's clearly labeled it's adult content, as long as it's sold in a place where adults buy it, as long as it's advertised in adult mediums, and it's not the Joe Camel. I'm taking an adult product and advertising it to children. So that's my philosophical thought. It's always governed Westwood's product philosophy. We make war games, and in Germany they have very strict standards. They actually ban almost every war game. They have never banned a Westwood product. Even our first-person shooter is over-the-counter in Germany because we're very sensitive to the people you shoot. Even the guys you shoot, they're wearing full-size masks and hands and gloves and stuff. You never see a human face. We don't have them writhe on the ground in agony. We don't blow them into bits. We focus more on the strategy and the tactics. We're trying to focus on the activity of the fun of the game and not on the violence that's associated with it. As far as, and like I said, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but as far as things like violence in our society, I think violent people find ways to exercise their desires, and if you make products that, I don't think games make people violent. I think people are violent, and they might gravitate toward violent games or violent music or violent movies, but I don't think any of those things made those people that way. If anything, it might even actually be a release for some people who are on the border. That's my thoughts on it.
So,
Did that answer?
I'm curious.
I'm not sure.
Of course, that answered it very well, and I agree absolutely with everything you're saying. I mean, who could argue with this? But as far as emotional impact, I'm not a game player, but when you go out and you see an incredible film by an incredible director and the impact that may have on your life to shape it, this is obviously a very emotional activity. And I'm just wondering how you would weigh the emotion and the impact, just in a way, maybe as a non-game player, I can see it more clearly.
Okay. So I think that interactive entertainment has a better opportunity to push emotional buttons. It's one of the things that's always attracted me to the industry and to the business than linear media. I personally believe that. Our storytelling capacity at this time is pretty weak, to say the least, compared to film and television. And it's getting better, but it's still not anywhere close. But when you're playing a game and you're actually doing the activities, I think it sinks in deeper and hits you harder. There was a game many years ago called Planetfall where you had this little robot called Floyd, and it was just text. But when Floyd got killed, I mean, I was wrenching. I was like, oh my God, Floyd got killed. Films never made me feel that way. So when you play Medal of Honor, which is a recent EA release, the visuals are nowhere close to Private Ryan, but the emotional impact is easily as strong. So I think our medium is a powerful emotional medium. I think it will one day have a way of shaping people's emotions and really pulling on those life-changing moments, like reading a particular book, like maybe an inspirational book or a film. We're not really quite there yet because we're still kind of focusing on some pretty lizard brain activity because it's just the medium isn't mature yet. One day it will be, though. I think it has more potential than any other medium to do that because you participate.
We have a question
Yep.
As a general manager of Westwood Studios, do you ever wish that you were still a programmer or designer of video games?
Yeah. As a general manager of Westwood Studios by night, by day I sit there and goof around with art direction and programming and technical direction and everything else. I just can't stop doing it. In fact, every now and then I'll pull out an ACM paper or Game Developers and I'll whip up and reinstall C++ on my hard drive and start programming. I really shouldn't be doing that. I know it's not a good use of my time, but do I wish I would do it? I still do it, so clearly I wish enough to actually go do it. But the reality is, unless you focus on one discipline now, it's very difficult to be world-class competitive in that discipline. I think my desire for knowledge in all those disciplines helps me be a better manager and a better director. And I'm sure that if someday I retire, I'll never retire. I'll still end up, it's like painting and drawing. I still paint, I still sketch. I can't stop doing that stuff. So one day I'll have more time and I'll consume it, doing all of those things. I'll be programming again and doing, in fact, I was showing one of the other students, in fact, earlier, you go through my notes books. I have all these meeting notes and these action items, and then you turn the page and I have, oh look, here's a linear interpolation for quaternions. Why am I doing that? I don't know. I'm never going to actually implement it, but it's something I'm just thinking about, a tessellation for NURBS or for different types of height map tessellations and triangle methodologies for loading up triangle meshes and stuff. I mean, these are things I don't need to do. I just can't help myself. So, yeah, I still love to do it.
So we have another question there. Yes. Yes. I was wondering how feasible do you think it is these days?
You can actually probably turn off that thing.
With,
can you turn that off by any chance? I guess I can go to a dark screen maybe. That'll do it. Can you do it? Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm like trying to look at you people.
Yeah. I was wondering how feasible you think it is for an independent garage developer to be competitive in a field up against companies like EA.
I get that question a lot. So Westwood was started with 2 guys in a garage. Can somebody else do it today? Every year it gets tougher and tougher. And I would say it's impossible without licensing a great deal of the technology behind the scenes and outsourcing a great deal of the content. So can two people still do it? Yes, if you're well funded, if you license a lot of stuff, and if you outsource a lot of stuff. But two people do all the work themselves? No. The amount of man hours you would have to commit, let's say that you were 10 times the better programmer than John Carmack, probably doesn't exist. The human being doesn't exist on the planet. But even if you were, you still couldn't, because there's 15 guys writing code for the next Quake, you still couldn't compete with those people unless you had something to start from. So,
what about conceptually, like with a higher design concept, like say independent films are competing against commercial films?
So you could do, okay, so when I'm talking, I want to be really clear. When I say you can't do it as two people, I mean a commercially competitive hit product. And so I'm saying you're going for 1 to 5 million units, right? There is a chance that you could do the next Tetris. There's a chance. You could be the next Miller Brothers that does the next Myst, but it's some different idea. It can't be the same idea. That doesn't work. It could be, but probably not. But one of those comes around every 4 or 5 years or so. Yeah. And no matter how good your idea is, the chance of you doing it. I'm from Las Vegas, right? So I'm not a gambling person by and large. I'm pretty conservative, and so I just don't think that's a good gamble. If you have a great idea and you think it would make a great product, properly resource it. Get it well funded.
I have a question that kind of brings the last two questions together. Just because things have changed so much since you started, I'm curious. There are pros and cons to being a studio VA and having gone from being two guys with few resources to having 250 people and a lot of high budget projects. So I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about the difference between the experience of the kind of renegade guerrilla game shop versus the large conglomerate-owned studio.
Okay. So Electronic Arts continues to grow, and I know this probably sounds like an arrogant statement, but it's actually just the truth. Electronic Arts doesn't see studios like Activision or others as competition anymore. They make products that compete in the same space, but Electronic Arts perceives as its competition Time Warner, Disney, and they're right. Okay, so we're an entertainment company. We have 3,000 employees, and we have to make good use of that size, or it'll become a thing that hurts our products, doesn't help our products. So the difference of making a product under that kind of umbrella versus just a couple of people getting together is, it would be very easy for me to go start another company, get lots of funding, and just make whatever kind of wild-ass idea I want, because I'd have a lot of people lining up to give me the money to do it, and I'd probably be fairly successful doing it. My bar would be way down here as far as the amount of money we spend and how much we'd have to sell to get that back. Part of the exciting part about being Electronic Arts is the bar's up here. And so I find it intriguing and invigorating to try to define new products inside a company where they throw away products that will sell 500,000 units, 700,000 units regularly. They look at their portfolio and they go, we can only do X number of products. Here's 5 product ideas that clearly will sell 500,000 or more. We're not going to do those because we've got better bets. As exciting and invigorating as that is, at some point, if they don't pick my ideas, then what choice do you have but to do it someplace else? So I think that that's what has happened with a lot of other creators that have worked for Electronic Arts and have moved on to do their own things. They had ideas that just, as a big company, that once they've done their analysis, and I told you it's very, very process-oriented analysis. Once they're all done with that, if your great idea that you really want to do doesn't meet the criteria, you don't really have a choice but to go do it someplace else. This is not necessarily the right organization for a crazy idea that can't be justified. I personally believe that if it ever were to come to it, it wouldn't be because the idea wasn't a great idea, it would be because it wasn't well described or well defined or well communicated. So it's a challenge to communicate those ideas, especially within a company like Electronic Arts, but the rewards are immense. They're huge. So I find it exciting, invigorating, love to do it. I don't have a bad thing to say about Electronic Arts. It's an amazingly well-run company. The only negative is if you have a really neat idea that could make a fun game, but it wasn't going to be a blockbuster hit, it's not the right place to do it. So if that's what you really want to do, it'd be like independent filmmaker decides to go to a big studio, and the studio says, well, that's a very nice idea for a picture, but that's not going to work. We're not going to be able to book 5,000 theaters for that. It's not the place to do it. If you're doing art, that's one thing. If you're doing commerce, that's another. I prefer to do commerce and try to squeak in as much art as I can, because I personally like to know that what I've done touched a lot of people. The more people, the better. I don't necessarily do it for the money anymore, in quotes, because I've been quite successful, but I still do it for the success. And so success is important to me, even if the money isn't as important. And I don't think that in this industry, as it continues to the stratification continues to happen and hits make up all the business, being one of those guys who did a product that 100, 150, or well, maybe not even 80,000 people thought was great. That's not going to excite me anymore as a creator. It'd be great if I had never done one before. But once you've done Lion King, it sold 4.5 million copies. You're trying to do the next thing that sells 5. You don't want to do one that did 500,000 and kind of was okay. So I hope that answers.
We still have a question
Sure.
here.
Hi, I have a question. I was wondering, how come games doesn't go to start using DVDs, making DVD games on computer?
DVD games. That's a really, really simple thing. This is like the easiest question to answer all night. Because when it says DVD on your drive, it may not be. So here's the problem. The companies that build CD-ROM drives about 2 years ago decided it would be really cute if they shipped out DVD-ready drives that say DVD right on the front, but they don't have the codec to decode DVDs, well, either in ROM form or as a player. Isn't that cool? So now, when we go out to consumers and we say, do you have a DVD? They look on the front and they go, oh yeah, I got a DVD, and it doesn't work. So we can't make DVD games because we have to wait for those systems to flush through the process before we can say with any confidence there are so few people with those drives now that we can actually trust the fact that when it says DVD, it really is. And you can't, and as many times, well, people go, well, I'll just put it in there and tell them. It's like, it doesn't work. I mean, you buy it, you think it does a thing. If it says it does a thing, you blame the manufacturer, and they send it back to us. We end up eating it. So in the case of our PS2 game, Pirates, The Legend of Black Cat, it is actually on a DVD, and it uses 5.1 surround sound and all sorts of other really cool stuff that we couldn't do if it wasn't on a DVD.
What is that?
So, Pirates.
That's the one you showed my class, right?
Yeah, Pirates, The Legend of Black Cat. And it just got released. It's getting great reviews, actually, in the 90s. Hey, cool. All right. That's what I usually do.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was looking through a book called Emergence, and he said in this book that Sim City was a kind of turning point in the relationship between consciousness and technology, because it showed people certain patterns about complex interrelationships. And this is kind of a complex question. You mentioned the GDI, something you thought up on your own that
Global
is
Defense
now
Initiative.
becoming realistic. I know in corporate planning, scenario planning is a key aspect now that they use to see various versions of various futures, and executives think about how they'd react to them. So really what I'm curious about is, do people in the industry working on the entertainment side of things, do you all ever talk about the social potential to model much, in much finer detail, much larger and more realistic scale events?
Yes. I mean, the quick answer is to all of that, yes. As an industry, as individuals, we discuss ad nauseum the social implications from one of the other questions of the products that we make. We debate whether we can model more complex interactions. If the computers, because personal computers are becoming so powerful, are there things that we can do with those that allow you to see patterns and allow you to get to truths or underlying patterns that might make up even psychology. And there's a great movie out right now called The Beautiful Mind. I don't know if you guys have seen it with Russell Crowe. And the behaviors of, when I was watching with my wife, And she goes, what is that he's scribbling up there? I go, that's flocking behavior. I mean, this is great stuff, you know. I mean, these diagrams that he's doing, and this was somebody who was just way ahead of his time and tragically mentally ill because of it, or maybe both came together, I'm not sure. But we now have the ability in our little laptops and personal computers to model things, interactivities. My twin brother has a PhD in biochemistry, and he used, there's these little tiny like fins inside the capillaries of trees, and nobody knows really why they're there, but evolution has produced them. So scientists are wondering, do they restrict flow? Do they inhibit or do they encourage, you know, the sap to flow or whatever? Well, you couldn't model anything like that before, so it was all theory and conjecture. Now you can actually model this kind of stuff, liquid dynamics, and it's amazing. I mean, so the answer to all of this stuff is that, yeah, it's blowing the lid off of all kinds of things that you never thought were possible before, because these guys who are making games are scientists. They're trained to be scientists. They're looking at behaviors, and they're modeling things that you could never do before, because there was never this kind of processing power. The natural language processing, you know, one of the things that I was talking to one of these folks earlier about, we're working on right now, natural language processing to take human voice, break it down into phonemes, written language, and emotional beats, emotional context. So what we hope to get out of that is, when I talk into a microphone, I end up with the actual sentence. But more importantly, I have the phonetics that break up the sentence, and I have the emotional charge behind the sentence, so that I can even detect things like sarcasm because of the way that I said it. Now, if you take that, and then you transfer it across a narrowband modem to another side, and then you synthesize voice on the other side and recreate those exact emotions, but with a different voice, a voice font, you say, wow, that's really cool. That means I can use this little narrow pipe, which is a modem, to play games. Yeah, but think a little bigger, and suddenly you go, wow, wait. So if I put that all into one chip, I could talk into a box, and it could talk out in another language. Well, you know, Gene Roddenberry was right. The universal translator is right around the corner. I mean, it will happen in no time at all. It'll be, you know, a year or two from now, you'll start having computers that can rudimentarily, I speak into one side, and on the other side comes out another language, and it's barely believable. Once that gets refined, I mean, that changes everything. I mean, it'll change the way our world communicates. And games are where it's going to happen, because we need to solve this problem. Everybody else doesn't have to solve it. We do. So I think that...
Okay. So I think we have time for two more quick questions. So you are the first of these two. Okay.
Hi. Well, it's along the same line of the question. I saw Metal Gear one time. I was really surprised by the graphic.
Metal Gear Solid?
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah.
Do you have ability to render high-res models and play in real time?
Yes. So the question is, can you render real high-res models of almost believable stuff in real time? Absolutely. The newer systems, the Xbox, the PS2, and the GameCube all have the power to render. In fact, actually, my wife was watching my son play GameCube. Walk away from that. My wife was watching my son play the GameCube version of Star Wars Rogue Leader. She walked in, and she was standing there. She was doing something, and she looked over, and she looked over again, and she was like, "Wait a minute." She thought she was watching the movie Star Wars. Why? Because the game is that good. It looks just like the film. We're already there. But on the PC side, which is what I was showing here, we have a scalability issue. So my machine that I was running that game on is about a third of the minimum we expect people to have, right? So it wasn't playing that great. But when you have a better and better system, it looks better and better. It looks very, very realistic. The next iteration of products is all about super realistic rendering. And now we start getting into filters. We start getting into cinematography. It's very, very powerful. It's going to look as good as film, as good as television now. I mean, we don't have to wait for it anymore. It's here. Now it's a question of not just looking that good, but can you model the world to believably be a real world? And that's where it falls apart right now. Right now, they look really good, and then they do something stupid, and you don't believe it.
Okay, and
one more?
One more quick question.
This is actually a comment and kind of a coda, I suppose you could say, relating to the last two questions. which is just that the game industry has managed to spearhead technological developments that academia and research and even industrial research have not been able to conquer. Like the voice issue is one that whole armies of academics have been working on this for years and haven't gotten anywhere close to finding what you guys are doing. And I think from my standpoint as an academic game person, I think, and I'm just sort of saying this to everyone in the room, that the game industry has been operating at such a higher level of evolution than anyone else in graphics, in AI, in everything.
Hardware as well.
And hardware and cost. And so we're now at a point from a research standpoint where we want to learn from them what they've done and then bring those ideas back to non-entertainment or more educational or cultural kinds of applications. So I think that what's exciting is that they did all the legwork for us, and now in Lewis's spare time he can come play with us in the lab.
Exactly. So I'll build on that a little bit because so I've watched in a very short number of years relative to big scope things. When we started our game business, I used to go out and read published papers and magazines and say, oh, in a couple of years we'll get there. I watched it I was reading the ACM papers for most recent published works saying, wow, we can figure out a way to implement this in real time. In fact, I developed a video compression codec for the original CD-ROMs based on the MPEG-2 standards. And, translating, it's very technical, but translating the color space and then breaking it down into blocks and stuff. I watch what our guys are doing now, and we finish developing actual practical implementations of sort of academic ideas. We finish them, we develop them, we package them, we ship them, and then we see the SIGGRAPH paper on it. So it's actually gone in just a very few number of years. We're more than the cutting edge. We're cutting the edge. We're cutting the front. We're the spearhead of the entire thing now. And it is no doubt to me whatsoever that games interactive entertainment will be the place where many of the really innovative things that change our lives as human beings come from. Because we're motivated by need. We have necessity. And necessity really is the mother of invention. There's an old axiom that holds absolutely true. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much for sticking around. I know it's went longer than expected. So.
Thank you very much, Luis, for this talk. I hope the dialogue will continue in the future. And we still have one more lecture in this expanded design series in 2 weeks' time, and then we'll have the founder of the legendary Museum of Jurassic Technology here in Los Angeles, artist, designer, scientist, and a MacArthur Fellow, David Wilson. So please be back in 2 years.